Hello, we are at Bill's Story, Chapter 1. Can't see anything. Excuse the background noise. I can't breathe in here. Okay. All right. War fever ran high in the New England town to which we new young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned, and we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. War fever is widespread enthusiasm for war. They were flattered because they got an ego boost from the praise. They felt heroic and brave. Here was love, applause, war, moments sublime with intervals hilarious. I was part of life at last, and in the midst of the excitement I discovered liquor. I forgot the strong warnings and prejudices of my people concerning drink. In time we sailed for over there. I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. War is used by powerful people to justify others' competition for limited resources. Okay. Moments sublime. I'd look up that word. I really like this. Sublime, a piece of philosophy experienced by the senses. The sublime refers to an experience of vastness, space, age, time, beyond calculation or comprehension. A sense of awe we might feel before an ocean, a glacier, the earth from a plane, or a stormy sky. In the presence of the sublime, we are made to feel desperately small. In most of life, a sense of our smallness is experienced as a humiliation when it happens, for example, at the hands of a professional enemy. But the impression of smallness that unfolds in the presence of the sublime has an oddly uplifting and profoundly redemptive effect. It's almost like the tangible presence of God. Moments sublime with intervals hilarious. Okay. He forgot about the warnings from his family. So back then, they even knew that if one of the family members was an alcoholic, those traits were passed down. We now know it's a genetic, but they knew it back then without even being able to scientifically prove it. They guessed. Loneliness. Alcohol is often used as an escape from loneliness. We landed in England. I visited Winchester Cathedral. Winchester Cathedral. You can look that up. Much moved, I wandered outside. So it became emotional and inspired by looking at Winchester Cathedral. I wandered outside. My attention was caught by a doggerel on an old tombstone. Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking cold small beer. A good soldier's never forgot whether he dieth by musket or by pot. It's Thomas Thatcher's grave. He was 26 years old when he died from drinking small beer, which is a low alcohol content beer. A Hampshire grenadier is a soldier who threw grenades and he was someone who hometown was in Hampshire, England. Ominous warning which I failed to heed. 22 and a veteran of foreign wars. I went home at last. I fancied myself a leader, for had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation, my talent for leadership, I imagined, would place me at the head of vast enterprises, which I would manage with the utmost assurance. Ominous warning. A foreboding of something in the future when he read that he did not pay attention to. So at 22 years old, he's a veteran, an old hand at foreign wars. I don't know when people were allowed to go to the war then, but see if he jumped into the war at 18, so 18, 19, 20, 22, he could have been in there 5 years. Long experience. The men of his unit gave him a medal. So all these great, his ego was really, really but boosted up. Okay. So he started getting delusions of grandeur. He thought he was going to continue going higher, 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 higher. Okay. I took a night law course and obtained employment as investor for a surety company. A surety insurance company. So he was checking for fraud in an insurance company and then going to college, night college. The drive for success was on. I proved to the world I was important. Why do we feel like it's necessary to prove to the world that we're important? Because we have really low self-esteem. My work took me about Wall Street, and little by little I became interested in the market. Many people lost money, but some became very rich. Why not I? There seems to be like two extreme ways of thinking in alcoholics. One is everything's going to go terribly wrong. And the other thing is everything's going to go wonderfully right. And there doesn't seem to be much of a balance or a middle there for some of us. It's typical alcoholic thinking. I studied economics and business as well as law. Potential alcoholic that I was, I nearly failed my law course. So he's drinking during his night college, which I drank my way through night school too. It was easy. At one of my finals, I was too drunk to think or write. Though my drinking was not yet continuous, it disturbed my wife. Wow, too drunk to think or write at a final. We had long talks when I would still her forebodings by telling her the men of genius conceive their best projects when drunk. Foreboding is an ominous warning about the future, okay? So he wanted to settle her down so that she wouldn't be afraid, see? And she could see what was happening where he couldn't. So men of genius, and you can prove that some of them did. Ben Franklin, Socrates, Karl Marx, Einstein, Edgar Allan Poe, drank. The most majestic constructions of philosophic thought were so derived. So, he's kind of blowing it up a little out of proportion. So they got their best ideas and influences while they were drinking. I used that as one of my, well, my father did that too. He was an alcoholic, and he used to use that excuse saying, well, these other men drank, and it helped them have great ideas. And to be fair, he had some really great inventions, and he wasn't a very intelligent man, except for when he drank. He was he was a master plumber, master welder. He was a chemist. He was a diesel mechanic. He was like a typical alcoholic that could do a whole bunch of different things, but never could settle on one, you know. And he fed me on his dreams. By the time I had completed the course, I knew the law was not for me. It was pretty boring. The inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grip. A maelstrom is a whirlpool of activity. It's very exciting. That's more like, we want the excitement. Business and financial leaders were my heroes. Out of this alloy of drink and speculation, I commenced to forge the weapon that one day would turn in its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. So out of this mixture of alcohol and financial investments and stock market game, he didn't know that one day in the future that those things were going to turn around and come back on him and destroy his life. That's what that means. The stock market crash is the boomerang. Living modestly, my wife and I saved $1,000. And it went into certain stocks, then cheap, or securities, which are stocks, then cheap and rather unpopular. I rightly imagined that they would someday have a great rise. I failed to persuade my broker friends to send me out looking over factories and managements, but my wife and I decided to go anyway. I had developed a theory that most people lost money in stocks through ignorance of markets. I discovered many more reasons later on. $1,000 was a lot of money back then in 1939. It's probably closer to 10,000 than, but I'm not sure. But it was a whole lot more than it is today. So he had an idea that he really put his all into it. Okay, he invested all his money. We gave up our positions and off we roared on a motorcycle, a sidecar stuffed with the tent blankets, change of clothes, and 3 huge volumes of a financial reference service. Back then, maybe something like that would have been really profitable. But he was by no means an ignorant man. This was an intelligent man. He'd been to law school. He'd already been around a lot of people in the stock market. It wasn't like most of the alcoholics' empty dreams that, we have a lot of the times. His actually had some substance to it, even though it was still a big risk, and we liked taking risks, But he put all his hope in this. Our friends thought a lunacy commission should be appointed. That is a public body that visited the mentally ill back then. Perhaps they were right. I had some success at speculation, So we had a little money, but we once worked on a farm for a month to avoid drawing on our small capital. He had some risky investments, is what a speculation is. The capital is his amount of money that he's investing into this venture. That was the last honest manual labor on my part for many a day. Honest manual labor. So, as opposed to dishonest, it's like the stock market may not be exactly honest labor. We covered the whole eastern United States in a year. It wasn't gonna, wow. At the end of it, my reports to Wall Street procured me a position there and the use of a large expense account. The information he gathered obtained a job for him that included paying for his expenses. The exercise of an option brought in more money, leaving us with a profit of several $1,000s. So an option is the right to buy and sell assets at a fixed price. So his expenses were paid. He still had his check, and he also had an option to buy and sell assets. For the next few years, fortune threw money and applause my way. I had arrived. My judgment and ideas were followed by many to the tune of paper millions. He's an intelligent man. His investment paid off. But when we start having success, it's just as hard for an alcoholic to manage success as it is to manage failure. And one of the reasons why is because our pride gets so big and our ego gets so big that we stop being, number one, we stop being humble and grateful for what we already have. And then it's like an addictive desire for more and more and more. Never enough applause, never enough money, never enough stuff. Never enough friends, never enough fame, never enough never enough. When is it going to be enough? The great boom of the late 20s was seething and swelling. The financial increase in the 20s was active and growing. It was in the middle of it. Drink was taking an important and exhilarating part in my life because a lot of guys would meet in these clubs that served alcohol and they would meet over drinks. This is very common in the business world. I don't know how it is today. There was loud talk in the jazz places uptown. Everyone spent in thousands and talked in millions. Scoffers could scoff and be damned. I made a host of fair weather friends. Okay. People who were laughing at him and ridiculing and mocking him, he didn't care because he was gonna show them just exactly who he thought he was. Fair weather friends are only there for the good times and not the bad times. My drinking assumed more serious proportions, continuing all day and almost every night. I'd say, wow, all day. My father would nurse like one can of beer for like the whole day. If he had it in his hand, it was like, that's how he really cut down. Oh. The remonstrances of my friends terminated in a row, and I became a lone wolf. Okay, I don't know. The remonstrances. I have forceful approach, but that can't be. It is my terminated, ended one after another, and he isolated. He began isolating. There were many unhappy scenes in our sumptuous apartments. There were emotional episodes, and sumptuous as luxurious. There had been no real infidelity, for loyalty to my wife, helped at times by extreme drunkenness, kept me out of those scrapes. A scrape is something you just manage to get through barely with great effort or difficulty. In 1929, I contracted golf fever. We went at once to overtake Walter Hagen. Walter Hagen was the father of professional golf and historically public figure. Liquor caught up with me much faster than I came up behind Walter. I began to be jittery in the morning. Golf permitted drinking every day and every night. You can't really golf if you're shaken. So to calm his nerves, he probably needed to drink in the morning to calm his nerves before the games. And then once you start, you got to keep drinking to keep that energy up, or you're going to pass out. Or I did, So we got inward reality, outward appearance. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. It was fun to carom, C-A-R-O-M, around the exclusive course which had inspired such awe in me as a lad. Carom means a shot in billiards where the cue ball hits two object balls in a single stroke. I don't. Okay, so it was bouncing around this real luscious golf course, okay, that when he was a little kid, he always thought it was so wonderful. I acquired the impeccable coat of tan one sees upon the well-to-do. Perfect. Back then, the perfect tan. Yeah. The local banker watched me whirl fat checks in and out of his till with amused skepticism. He was not easily convinced. How many pages do we got left? Lot. A whole lot. Try to get another couple pages. Abruptly, on October 1929, hell broke loose on the New York Stock Exchange. After one of those days of inferno, hell, I wobbled from a hotel bar to a brokerage office. It was 8 o'clock p.m., 5 hours after the market closed. The ticker still clattered. I was staring at an inch of the tape, which bore the inscription XYZ32. It had been 52 that morning. I was finished, and so were many friends. So he lost everything. I guess he had everything invested in the stock market, and a lot of people did. They made a lot of money and made their living off of the stock market. They paid all their taxes and on their homes and their cars and stuff like that. But then when you can't pay your taxes, you lose your home and you lose your car and you lose all that stuff. The papers reported men jumping to death from the towers of high finance. That disgusted me. I would not jump. I went back to the bar. I think that a man's ego is different from a woman's. I think that when they put a lot of their sense of self into their ability to provide. And when they lose that ability to provide for their families, it really is such a huge blow to their ego that sometimes it really crushes them. And I think that that might be why a lot of people became so depressed. That's why they done that, in my opinion. But he went back to the bar. He wasn't going to jump. He was going to do slow suicide instead because he was better than that. He was better than that. My friends had dropped several million since 10 o'clock. So what? Tomorrow was another day. That's delusional. As I drank, the old fierce determination to win came back, liquid courage. Next morning, I telephoned a friend in Montreal. He had plenty of money left, and I thought I had better go to Canada. By the following spring, we were living in our custom style. I felt like Napoleon returning from Elba. No St. Helena for me. See, I don't know anything about that history. But drinking caught up with me again, and my generous friend had to let me go. This time we stayed broke. His friend had to let him go. Maybe he didn't necessarily want to. Maybe he wanted to help him, but when someone becomes an alcoholic, there's really not much you can do for them except for cut them off. And that's not something I really recognized in my drinking, that, the reason people let me go is because they didn't know how to help me and they couldn't continue feeding into my disease, because the more you help someone who's actively drinking, we just, we'll suck that out of people. We'll take their help and we'll use all that to funnel it into getting ourselves more alcohol and killing ourselves faster. So there's really no other, I don't know any other way. I've tried a lot of ways, but I really don't know any other way. That it's not that no one loved me or cared about me. It's that that's the kindest thing that they could have done. Next, yeah. We went to live with my wife's parents. That had to be a blow to his ego. I found a job, then lost it as the result of a brawl with a taxi driver. That's a noisy fight or argument, not necessarily a physical fight. Mercifully, no one could guess that I was to have no real employment for 5 years or hardly draw a sober breath. I have 10 years here. So I think that's 10 years from when he started drinking at this point. My wife began to work in a department store, coming home exhausted to find me drunk. I became an unwelcome hanger-on at brokerage places. So now he's a bum. He's an alcoholic bum hanging around hoping to get a few, get some change or whatever, because he can't work. The reasons that he couldn't work is because his emotions were probably because he had a really bad argument with the taxi drivers, out of control. Inability to control his emotions. Alcoholism will make people very physically ill, so they're not physically capable. of going to work. It's too much. It emaciates them, depletes their body of all the nutrition that their bodies need, and it takes time for a body to completely rebuild itself after something like that. Liquor ceased to be a luxury, it became a necessity. That's a big gap. When you go from saying, oh, I can have, a glass of champagne a night, to now I have to, first thing when I wake up in the morning, I need bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, and often 3 got to be routine. That's a big deal. Bathtub gin is homemade gin cut with water. Sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s, and I would pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. So he's not eating at home, he's going to the bars and eating out. This went on endlessly, and I began to waken very early in the morning, shaking violently. A tumbler full of gin, followed by half a dozen bottles of beer, would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. A tumbler is 17 ounces, so 16 ounces is a cup, a big glass. So we had to have that full of gin. Not clean gin, but homemade gin that was kind of dirty and gross. And then he had to, on top of that, drink 6 beers and that before he could eat. I had to drink in the morning before I could eat. Nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation, and there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. So, as long as we think we have control and we can manage our alcoholism to just that extent, are we out of control. But the moment that we finally admit that we can't control our drinking, and what we can control is our recovery, and put all our 100% into that, 100% into recovery program or whatever it is you're doing, then you start to gain some control by giving control over to a higher power. Gradually, things got worse. The house was taken over by the mortgage holder. My mother-in-law died. My wife and father-in-law became ill. You think that had anything to do with them being stressed out and worried about everything because he was ruining his life and their life also, because they were part of the family living in the same home? Okay, back then families were close-knit, so a lot of people in Al-Anon, you get real sick when you have to be always stressed out all the time. And I just can't, Oh, I wonder about that. Everybody's sick and dying. It's a family disease. It affects everyone. Then I got a promising business opportunity. Stocks were at the low point of 1932. 7 years before he sobered up, 1932. And I had somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits. So finally he's going to get it back together. Everything looks great. That's when he decides to go on a huge drinking spree to self-sabotage himself. Why do we do that? I don't know. Then I went on a prodigious bender, and that chance vanished. I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. So now I finally figures out I can't take the first one. If I don't take the first drink, then I can get my life back together. But every time, so he finally figures it out, right? Before then, I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed this time I meant business, and so I did. Shortly afterward, I came home drunk. There'd been no fight, where had been my high resolve, my strong determination. I simply did not know. It hadn't even come to mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way, and I had taken it. Was I crazy? I began to wonder, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. Renewing my resolve, I tried again. He had no follow-through on his decision. He made a real decision. He put all his willpower back behind of that decision. It was the right decision not to take the first drink. But it was just a decision that wasn't followed through with any kind of action that was going to cement that idea in his head. So we have a program of action and a way of living, so we help, if we feel like drinking, we help someone else or go to a meeting or call our sponsor, things we can do. He didn't have anything. It was him all by himself. And his wife was already sick. Remember? And she couldn't help him anymore. She wanted to hold out hope for him, but, anyway, she couldn't lift him up. It's time for him to get help. It was shocking, lack of perspective, inability to see a situation or issue from a broader viewpoint, often leading to an overly focused or distorted understanding. He couldn't see himself because he was too close to him. He couldn't see his own situation. Okay, some time passed, and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness. So he said, this time I mean business, and his wife agreed with him, and he started getting confident after some time, and then he got cocky. That's common. Cocksureness is arrogance. So his faith changed. I could laugh at the gin mills. Now I had what it takes. I will never say never. Hopefully not place myself in a position to be hurt just to test myself, to prove to myself that I can do it. Why would I tempt myself and say, you know what, I can go to the bar now and I'll show you? Why would I do that? Why would I? And I did that. I did that. But that way of thinking down the road got me. Because even though I was capable of going to the bar and not drinking, just on the false pretenses of having a pool league, we started a pool league in AA and a bowling league, and these places were in drinking establishments. Wasn't a good idea. It's not a good idea. It's never a good idea. I'm not saying to be afraid, but we don't test ourselves like that. And then one day I walked into a cafe to telephone. In no time I was beating on the bar, asking myself how it happened. Because it's the thinking. It starts in our thinking. As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time. Control. But I might as well get good and drunk then, and I did. You think somewhere in his subconscious that he didn't know that once he started drinking, he was going to go ahead and drink till he couldn't, stand or whatever? He knew somewhere subconsciously. So bring it to our conscious awareness. He went to a place that he'd been before. Because look, there's a telephone there. He knew there was a telephone there, so he'd been there before. Old playmates and playgrounds. Trying self-control with alcoholism doesn't work. The remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. The courage to do battle was not there. My brain raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. You know, I hardly dared cross the street lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. So the remorse, horror, and hopelessness of something like that feels like being, in my opinion, for me, it felt like being trapped in hell and not being able to get out, even though you desperately wanted to and tried with everything you had. So his courage, which is the ability to do something that frightens someone, or in the face of fear, action in the face of fear, was gone. He was afraid. We have a sense of impending doom. And his sense of impending doom was very real. He was afraid he's going to faint in trying to cross the street because he was so weak from malnourishment and drinking so long that he could hardly do anything. He really needed to check himself in somewhere. But, alcoholics have so much pride. We don't want to check ourselves in because we don't want anybody to see how bad, how badly we done ourselves, And the shame is just something you got to, I had to push through it and do the right thing no matter anyway. That's the only way it's going to go away. You can't run no more, And his solution was always the same solution because he didn't have another solution. See, back then they didn't have another solution. Now we have another solution. But, there's still the pride. But back then they didn't even have a real solution. Now we do. So we just take all the actions that we used to put towards drinking and divert those actions towards something else. Instead of getting a drink, I'm going to go to a meeting. Instead of going to the bar, I'm going to go to a meeting. Instead of going to the hospital, I'm going to check myself into a treatment center. Instead of this, I'm going to do that. There's other things we can do now that's been proven to work. So we know no one's going to force us to do anything. We have to be the ones to do it. So a solution. An all-night place supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. My writhing nerves were stilled at last. Shaken. A morning paper told me the market had gone to hell again. Well, so had I. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. Okay? So suddenly he's starting to get his priorities right. So he lost everything he had. And now it's down to his life. Money don't seem to matter so much now. Should I kill myself? No, not now. Then a mental fog settled down. Gin would fix that, so 2 bottles and oblivion. So the thinking of an alcoholic is extremely... It's a terrible place to live inside the mind of a practicing alcoholic. It's very obsessive. It's torturous. It's torturous. It really, I don't know what other word to say. It's not life. You know, we feel like we lived in hell for the entire part of our drinking careers. But there's a way out, and that's why I'm doing this. The mind and body are marvelous mechanisms, for mine endured this agony for 2 more years. I don't know how he lived that long. Mind and body are amazing systems. He suffered and suffered for 2 more years, but sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. Morning terror and madness. So you wake up like in a cold sweat. So like in my alcoholism, it wasn't just you open your eyes and you hear the birds sing and you yawn and you stretch and you get up and that's not how it is. When you're an alcoholic, you're a practicing alcoholic, and you wake up, you can wake up like like that, in a panic, extreme fear, a pile of sweat, and it's just horrible. And the only way to get rid of that fear that I knew instantly, because God, I didn't want to feel that way. But when I finally decided I was going to go ahead and feel that way until like probably somewhere between 3 to 6 months, I was in a state of survival panic, extreme fear. But you know, I was willing to, I didn't care no more how I felt. I did not want to live that way no more. I went to a lot of meetings. Insanity. Again, I swayed dizzily before an open window or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. So a lot of us have played with those types of ideas as a way out instead of actually doing the work that it takes to be accountable for the choices that we make, accountable to get our butts up, get to a meeting. If your butt falls off, pick it up, carry it to a meeting. You know, if we just could go for 30 days to a treatment, at least that'd give us a chance. And I'm telling you, it's much, much better than the other way of life. Holy cow. There were flights from city to country and back as my wife and I sought escape. So we're running from it, but you can't run from it. You got to face it. It's the only way out. Then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish I feared I would burst through my window sash and all. So the abuse was so evil and horrible and dark, he thought he might jump out the fucking window with, you know, the entire frame with him. Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor, lest I suddenly leap, so he put his mattress outside just in case. A doctor came with a heavy sedative, barbiturates, phenobarbital. Writhing nerves are random, involuntary movements, typically affects the mouth, trunk, and limbs, tremors, seizures, lack of oxygen to the brain, low blood sugar, hypoxia. So it's like this chewing nails, shaking, picking your hair, just kind of like doing that. Oh, Lord. Because we burn up our nervous system, and it takes time for our nervous system to settle down, but we never give our nervous system a chance to recover and heal, because every time we pick up another drink to calm our nervous system down, what we're doing is killing our nervous system instead of allowing it to heal. So, it's not working. Doesn't work. So we're at the top of page 7. I'll make it to the end of this page and then I'm done. Next day found me drinking both gin and sedatives. So now he's combining alcohol and pills. I did that. This combination soon landed me on the rocks. Rocks is a crisis. Like a ship crashes into the rocks. So it put him into a crisis. People feared for my sanity. So did I. I could eat little or nothing when drinking, and I was 40 pounds underweight. I was much more than 40 pounds underweight. Well, maybe. Yeah, probably about 40 pounds. Weakened immune function, malnutrition, osteoporosis, anemia, cancers, all kinds of shit that can be reversed if you stop drinking. My brother-in-law is a physician, and through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. Well, he's lucky his brother-in-law was a doctor. They were very nice about it. They didn't make him feel bad, and they paid for it. There's a lot of money to save his life. Under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. The belladonna treatment is, I don't know. I thought I had that here. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much. That's a warm water bath with herbs. Best of all, I met a kind doctor, explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill, bodily and mentally. So the thing is, we're not bad people, we're not weak people, we're not stupid people, okay? We're not even weak-willed, we're just misdirecting our willpower. Our willpower should be geared towards getting the help that we need instead of getting the drink that we don't need. When you redirect your will to do the right things, it might work with God's help. It relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though often remains strong in other respects. My incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. Desperate means having little hope, extremely bad, serious or dangerous, having a great need or desire. There's we get so used to doing the same thing over and over again, that we keep doing it even though we know we shouldn't be doing it. We don't know how to stop doing it. But I think the trick was not so much to stop as it was to change it to do something different instead for me. Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. So now he wants the easy fix. Okay, now I understand. And he's done. And there's nothing you have to do. There's no follow-up. You don't have to work on yourself. You don't have to go to counseling therapy. You don't have to talk about your problems. You don't have to pray. You have to do nothing because we're too lazy for all that. We just want a quick fix, an easy fix, and that's the problem. We always wanted the easy way out. The easier, softer way is the harder way. But the harder way is the easier, softer way. Get it through our brains. There's no shortcuts. Oh. I fared forth in high hope. He went on for 3 or 4 months. The goose hung high. Everything was well. I went to town regularly, even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. Understanding our traits, motivations, abilities, and feelings. But it was not, for the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. Psh! His beliefs, principles, and actions that contribute to a just, compassionate society is what morals are. You stop caring, okay? Nobody cares when they're drinking. That's the deal. Drink because they don't want to care. Alcoholics are some of the most sensitive, wonderful, loving, capable human beings in the world, and sometimes we just care too much. And we just want to stop caring for a minute. And that's not the solution, because you don't want to stop caring forever. Okay, after a time, I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the end, the curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, or I would develop a wet brain perhaps within a year. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. Can you imagine? So after some time, he goes back to the hospital. And the doctor says, he tells his wife, his weary and despairing wife, his tired, hopeless, already sick wife, that he would die with shaking, sweating, hallucinating, and have a heart attack, or he was going to be brain dead vegetable who would have to, be put down or fed through a straw or something like that. That's what her life was going to be like because of him. And she needed to start thinking about, his funeral arrangements, or what mental institution she was going to put him in. They did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. Why did he welcome the idea? Because then he wouldn't have to think, he wouldn't have to feel, he wouldn't have to deal with all that stress that he didn't know how to deal with. He never was taught how to deal with. People in that era, they didn't get taught like coping skills. There was no such word as that. And they were taught that's how you handle your emotions, is you drink it away. Was he welcomed the idea because he'd been living in hell for so long. It was a devastating blow to my pride. Okay, belladonna treatment belladonna is a poisonous plant, along with other extracts. A detox treatment. Purge and puke. Wow. So they'd make him sick. Wet brain is life-threatening, caused by a vitamin B1 deficiency. So B1 is, I think it's B12 actually is the one that addicts really need. I don't know about alcoholics. So we're at the top of page 8. It's like, I'm going to finish this paragraph and end. I who had thought so well, you know what, I'm going to stop right there, top of page 8. And we will finish that later.